As the federal parliament resumed today for its final 2 weeks of sittings for the year, plans to tackle the big banks over rising interest rates dominated, but all sides have a different view on how to rein them in. The Greens today introduced a private members bill, which the government and the opposition will not support, while next week Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey will bring in his own bill to bolster the powers of the ACCC to examine claims of price signalling. The government says it will announce its reforms next month. As the parliamentary year draws to a close, MPs and senators also have to deal with some contentious moral issues, including a Greens-led debate later tonight on same-sex marriage. Political editor Heather Hewitt.
As the Prime Minister jetted in this morning from her overseas summits, the federal parliament was bracing itself for the final frenetic 2 weeks of this tumultuous political year. One private members' bill after another was being introduced in the House of Representatives.
What my bill does, Mr Speaker, is it ensures that these Wild Rivers declarations cannot take place, cannot have effect without the specific consent of the affected Aboriginal people.
From wild rivers to banking and a push by the Greens to rein in the big banks by scrapping $2 fees for ATMs, cap exit fees and limit mortgage profit margins.
Mr Speaker, enough is enough. The Australian taxpayer backed the banks through the GFC, and now it's time the banks gave something back.
When it comes to the Greens, I believe that they're genuine in their approach, but they will get the wrong outcome. If you do what they want, you will end up rationing credit and a lot of people will miss out.
Why do you think the banks aren't listening to you?
Well, the banks are just arrogant in the extreme, completely out of touch. That's why we need a second wave of competition reforms, and we will put those in place.
But not while the Parliament is sitting. The government plans to announce its own reforms next month and not a moment before. Like the opposition, it won't support the Greens' private members' bill, but predictably enough, the opposition was trying to force the government's hand during question time this afternoon.
Why won't the Prime Minister release now her so-called long-standing plan for more banking competition?
It's only since he sat on the opposition front bench that he's cared for 1 minute about these matters. And I use the terminology cared for 1 minute deliberately because it was only 1 minute's consideration he gave until he ran out and blurted out his plan to re-regulate interest rates, and he's been backpedalling to cover up that brain explosion ever since.
Everyone in this building, it seems, now holds an expert view on the big banks and is clamouring to be heard. Next week, the opposition will introduce its own private members' bill to bolster the powers of consumer watchdog, the ACCC, to address price signalling. And before the session is over, the Greens hope to move to put a 2-year freeze on banks being able to increase interest rates beyond the Reserve Bank rate. It's the dominant theme in a parliament that today already had the look of a bunch of overexcited school kids on the last day of term.
I asked the Prime Minister, when does she expect to find her way by setting out some clear, direct, specific and deliverable policies to stop the tax rises, to stop the cost of living rises and, above all else, to stop the votes.
You've got to give the Leader of the Opposition this. Once he's told a slogan by a focus group, he never deviates from it. Never deviates from it. Not once, not ever. Driven by focus groups every day of the week with his 3-word slogans.
And that's pretty much the general tone to expect from here on in the dying days of this parliamentary session. They're all ready to go home. But not before a few contentious moral issues are dealt with, courtesy of the Greens. Later this week, the Parliament will face a move to reinstate the rights of territory governments to legalise assisted suicide. And later tonight in the House of Representatives, members will debate a Greens motion to canvass the views of the electorate on same-sex marriage.
It shouldn't be overly controversial to be asking members of parliament to consider going back and engaging and discussing an important issue like this with their electorates, with the people of the communities that they represent.
It's only happening because we are in a situation where no one party has the majority in Parliament, in the House of Representatives, and that means that there is scope for debating issues like this. One of the things we are hoping is that this will be the next step in what is, as some Labor senators have said, an inevitable reform in this country.
Adam Brandt, he's just arrived and he's telling everybody else how to do their job. This is the Greens canvassing ways to wedge the left wing of the Labor Party, so, we'll deal with it like that.
It's a tricky issue for many MPs, depending on where their electorates are, and has the potential to create serious divisions in both major parties. But it's certainly trickier for Labor than the coalition. There's a long list of speakers on both sides who'll address the motion tonight, including Liberal frontbencher Malcolm Turnbull. The Greens are hoping for a conscience vote down the track, but so far, Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott are strongly resisting this.
What is the time frame to bring this on in the Senate? Are you going to delay until you see how all of this pans out?
Well, of course, we wouldn't be bringing the bill on this year. We've only got 2 more weeks left. I would really like to see good support from both Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard, and them concede that the best way forward for their parties, for their members, for their constituents, for the voters of Australia to have a conscience vote on this issue. And when that is granted, and then we can actually have a free and open discussion in the Parliament.
The Greens shouldn't hold their breath for that development, but with some prominent right-wing Labor members starting to signal support for same-sex marriage, they live in hope that ground may shift at the next ALP National Conference many months away. As for the coalition, it seems they're preoccupied with more pressing matters at the moment.
I'm reluctant to do it, Mr Speaker, but I have raised this previously. Early in the morning on sitting days, there's a tendency for lawnmowers and air blowers to be used outside offices during the course of radio interviews. On one occasion, I've actually had to stop the interview. I know it's hard to believe, Mr Speaker, but I actually had to stop the radio interview until the noise had passed. I again request that we do not have the extraordinary noise of lawnmowers and various other machinery being used outside our office windows between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m.
Maybe it really is time for the summer break.
Political editor Heather Hewitt there.